Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, Guidance to Help Schools Support Children with Disability and Avoid Disparities in the Discipline. This is our OSEP webinar. And okay, I'm gonna walk you through some housekeeping issues. We have the feature for closed captioning here. So if you want to use closed captioning, click on the CC right there at the bottom, and you will be able to see the closed caption. También tenemos interpretación al español. This is interpretation to Spanish. Tenemos dos personas que están interpretando en este momento. Para acceder al canal en español, van a ver en la banda o cinta negra un globo que indica interpretación. Hagan clic allí, luego seleccionan español y oprimen donde dice Mute Original Audio. Esto último filtra completamente la presentación en inglés para que puedan escuchar con claridad a nuestros intérpretes, Ryan y Laura. Now back to Carmen.
Hi, everyone. This is Carmen Sanchez. You know me as the program lead for the parent centers, and I'm really delighted we'll have this webinar to answer some of your questions, to go over the discipline guidance that has come out, because we know how important this is and how well received it has been with the parent centers. So we have a lot to go over. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce David Cantrell. He's the Deputy OSEP Director, to say a few comments. David?
Thank you, Carmen. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm so glad you joined us today. I want to thank particularly the Center for Parent Information and Resources, or CIPR, and the PTIs from across the country for participating in today's webinar on OSEP's recently released Discipline and Behavior Guidance Package. The PTIs do incredible work helping families navigate through complicated systems and processes, serving as high quality and trusted resources. We know the PTIs have been working to educate families about the new guidance package through a variety of outreach activities. And today, we are pleased to highlight the dissemination efforts of the Peel Center in Pennsylvania, just right up the street from us here in Washington, D.C. We encourage you to share your outreach efforts with us and continue to let us know how we at OSEP can support you in the work that you do. Today, we'll hear from three incredible OSEP staff colleagues of mine who continue to serve as resources to you even after today's call: Lisa Pagano, Kim Hines, and Keisha Blythe. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and thanks again once for joining us.
Thank you so much, David. As David mentioned, Lisa, Keisha, and I are so pleased to be with you today to discuss the Discipline and Behavior Guidance Package, which consists of the three documents that you see on this screen and that you all know very well: the Dear Colleague Letter, the Question and Answer document, and the Technical Assistance document titled Positive Proactive Approaches to Supporting the Needs of Children with Disabilities, a Guide for Stakeholders. As you know, this is the most comprehensive guidance on IDEA's discipline requirements since the law was reauthorized in 2004. It consolidates and updates and expands on previous guidance, and it addresses just the requirements under IDEA. So it does not address Section 504 or any state-imposed requirements. Next slide, please. Thank you. So with that said, we did want to also let you know that in July, the Office for Civil Rights did issue their own guidance on discipline and children with disabilities. And so you can find that document here as well and on our website. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have a really full agenda for you today and only a short amount of time. So we wanted to kind of map out what we would like to chat with you about. And really, our goals for today are that you walk away from this discussion with some new resources or some new ideas for how to communicate about IDEA's discipline and behavior requirements. And to that end, we will kick off the conversation with Mary Hartley and Cindy Dutch from the Peel Center, as David mentioned. And they will share with us how they are spreading the word about the guidance package. We really do hope that this could be an exchange of ideas and strategies. And so if you have initiatives that you have been working on to try and get the word out about the discipline guidance package, please feel free to put them in the chat. We would love to be able to use this opportunity as a forum for that information exchange. After we hear from Mary and Cindy, we will dive into the content and explore some of the highlights of the discipline guidance package. Specifically, we will focus on the areas of change in placement, informal removals, manifestation determination reviews, and services provided during disciplinary removals. After that, we will kind of make a shift toward looking at how we can approach behavior through a lens of prevention, or to mitigate or even prevent behaviors before they occur. And so in this second part of the presentation, we will look at some of IDEA's requirements related to how IEP teams should address behavior, including looking at functional behavioral assessments and behavioral intervention plans. And then at the end, we hope to have time for a good conversation. Of course, as was said earlier, please feel free to put comments in the chat. We will try and keep up with them as we go. But we will leave this time at the end to have that conversation as well. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Mary Hartley and Cindy Dutch from the Peel Center.
Hi, thank you, everyone. My name is Mary Hartley. I'm the Executive Director of the Peel Center in Pennsylvania, and I'm here today with my colleague, the Director of Individual Assistance, Cindy Dutch from Pennsylvania. We just want to share how grateful we were for this guidance. This really is an important aspect for the Peel Center in terms of educating parents, giving them advocacy tools around discipline guidance, and a wonderful acknowledgement by OSEP that this was incredibly necessary. I myself am a parent who has experienced informal removal, and I think this is going to be a huge help for many, many people. So thank you. So we wanted to talk. I wonder if you can go to the next slide. Oh, so to talk about a little bit about some of our trainings, and I'm going to have Cindy Dutch talk about those.
So we kicked this off in August with internal staff training. We thought it was important for staff to really understand, get on board with the guidance that came from OSEP. This included all internal staff. So everyone was aware of the information that came out, and they could answer questions regarding the Q&A, the guidance, the Dear Colleague letter. Then we were working with a school district, took a look at their executive summary from their cyclical monitoring and identified the needs in the district, and worked with the district and their school board in setting up a training for the families and for the faculty, not only faculty, but administration and staff. And that occurred October 18th. It was, it was well attended, and there was a lot of conversation around it. So it was really helpful to all that were involved there. And it's really nice, to have families and school district personnel together in trainings, hearing the same information at the same time. We're planning on November 8th, next week, having what we're calling Fast Facts, discipline and guidance in schools, to get the information out to a larger audience. So this is going to be something that Peel is offering to anyone in the state who registers for the Fast Facts. Oh, it's also going to be Facebook Live. We're at that.
And you're welcome to that training. We're happy to share that with you. So lastly, one of the most important ways that we communicate anymore certainly is by, and all of us know, is that there are a lot of families who are very busy, may not have time training, but need to get this information quickly. And we've been able to communicate the materials that have been shared with us by SIPR back into the website to look at the materials to share out. I think part of this is just because people aren't on Facebook all the time. We have a lot of feed, so we continually are sharing out the materials that have been provided to us. And we're certainly looking for this information in Spanish as well. So if you can just, I'll just show a couple examples. We shared the announcement from SIPR when the secretary initially. And then the next slide is great links. And then in our news, we've repeated several times in English and Spanish about the new guidance and the resources that are available. We're happy to answer any questions later on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Cindy and Mary. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your work and all of the ways that you're trying to spread the word about the discipline guidance package. Again, if you have your own strategies that you're using within your parent center that you would like to share so that we can have this be a forum for an exchange of ideas, please feel free to put them in the chat. Next slide, please. So let's begin our discussion about the guidance. So of course, we all know the detrimental impact that exclusionary discipline can have on children. It is certainly hard for a child to learn when they are removed from the classroom. So let's take a look at some national data and trends that served as one of the motivators for OSEP to issue this guidance. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So you've all seen this national data and you know how compelling it is. Oh, could we go back one slide? Sorry. Perfect, thank you. So students with disabilities are disciplined at high rates, particularly children with disabilities of color. And these trends, as you know, start as early as preschool and they extend throughout high school. So of course, while having this national data is important, we know that you are interested in knowing how your state or your local school districts are faring. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we wanted to share with you resources that you may or may not already be aware of. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see that we have the Civil Rights Data Collection, which comes out of the Department's Office for Civil Rights. And then on the right-hand side, you see that we have the IDEA Section 618 data collection database, which OSEP operates. Both are really fantastic resources to access data at the state level, and OCR's data drills down to the local and school levels as well. So you all know how data can be powerful and compelling, and we try and integrate it, of course, into everything that we are doing. But it really did serve as a motivator for one of the reasons why OSEP issued this guidance. So next slide, please. Thank you. So again, right, looking at this data and in combination with other information that OSEP was getting from the field really led us to including the quote that you see on the screen in the introduction to the Q&A. So I'll just very briefly read it. The department is concerned that misapplying, or in some cases not applying, the provisions found in IDEA, including the discipline provisions, has contributed to inappropriate exclusion, particularly for children of color with disabilities, and has resulted in denying access to critical educational opportunities. Next slide, please. And so to that end, as you know, one of the pieces of the discipline guidance package is a very comprehensive question and answer document. It addresses 12 key areas that explore IDEA's discipline requirements, and it also includes a glossary of terms. Today, we will focus on just a couple of these topics that I mentioned earlier, but we wanted to make sure that you were aware of all of the topics that are included in the package itself. So now I will turn it over to Lisa, who will discuss change in placement and informal removals. Lisa?
Okay. Am I back? You guys seeing me okay?
We see you and hear you.
And you hear me. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. And it's great to be back with this group again. I wanted to share, I think some of you may have joined us back in July. Shortly after we released this guidance at the leadership conference, we had a listening session. Many of you attended and gave us some really good ideas, some great feedback, and we have been busy since that time. Kim and Keisha have done a lot of dissemination, doing presentations for different audiences of stakeholders. But we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to meet with you guys after you had some time to digest all of this information. We appreciate all of the thanks that we have gotten. We know things can always be improved, but we are really glad that you're finding so many good nuggets within this guidance package to help support families as they are advocating and looking for appropriate services for their child and working with their schools. So I'm going to review a big chunk of slides here, so you're stuck with me for the next bit. As Kim laid out the data, we know, and we know that you know, that excluding children with disabilities from their regularly assigned classrooms and maybe even their schools happens way too often. And in one school year, over 3 million school days were missed due to out-of-school suspensions for children with disabilities. That's really something to think about. We know that too often school staff pull the exclusionary discipline tool from their tool belt as a way of responding to a child's behavior. This guidance package really sought to shine a light on practices of over-reliance, resorting to, choosing to use a disciplinary approach to responding to a child's behavior, that is problematic. And what we really want folks to do, and I know that you guys are promoting with your families and others that you speak with, is really looking at taking more of a preventative type of approach to ensure that IEPs properly address the needs of children with disabilities, that school staff are properly trained, that schools are using those evidence-based strategies that have been proven to work rather than sending a child home. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Okay. So in the guidance, we actually, for the first time, really use the terms exclusionary discipline and assign sort of a definition to it, because IDEA doesn't define the term. And we thought, if we're going to write 55 pages about exclusionary discipline in a Q&A, plus have the supporting documents, we need to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. And so you'll find the definition in the glossary. And we wanted to make clear that when we're talking about exclusionary discipline, we're not just talking about the things that people may have customarily thought about expelling children or suspending children. But also looking at these other ways that children are removed from where they should typically be to receive their education. And one of the biggest areas we really wanted to highlight was the use of shortened days and other types of informal removals that remove children, that take children out of their regularly assigned classrooms and programs for some portion of the school day, but that schools do not necessarily characterize as a disciplinary removal. They may never document them. And as a result, you know, a lot of these kinds of things can occur to the point that a child is denied FAPE. I know many of you, if you were around in 2016 or is it 15? I always get confused. We issued the FAPE letter that talked about using positive behavioral approaches and the responsibility of IEP teams to ensure that the children have the appropriate positive supports to address their behavior in their IEPs. And we also said in that letter, so that was what, 6 or 7 years ago now, that the repeated use of these kinds of measures, removing a child for some portion of the day or sending them down to another office to sit, or having a parent come and pick up the child, and making deals with parents. If you come and take him home for a couple of days, it won't be in his record. It won't go down as being a disciplinary problem. I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Okay, all right, just wanted to check that I wasn't just sitting here talking to myself. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, because I think we're going to talk some more about removals and the very important concept of informal removal. So next slide, please. Okay, so in the guidance, we reiterate what has been in some of our longstanding policy in the analysis of comments and changes, generally around things like when an in-school suspension counts as a disciplinary removal. These same 3 factors have been around in our guidance for a while, but it was the first time that we kind of paired these with the concept or the term informal removal. So OSEP has said it's going to be considered a disciplinary removal unless all 3 of these things are occurring. And we think this is a pretty high bar to be met. So it's going to be a removal unless the child is still afforded opportunities to participate in the general curriculum, and the child's continuing to receive the services that are set forth in their IEP, and the child continues to participate with non-disabled children to the same extent they would have had in their current placement. So all 3 of those things need to be present, or else the school needs to consider that and count that as a disciplinary removal. So certainly when a school calls up a parent and says, your kid's really acting up this morning, please come and get him, is that child going to still continue to appropriately participate in the general curriculum? Probably not. Are they going to continue to receive the services specified or on their IEP? It's going to be really difficult for that to happen. And the third thing is, if they're going home, they are not participating with non-disabled children to the same extent they would have had in their current placement. Next slide, please. So the concept of change in placement, and I know you guys have reviewed this, and this might be old hat to you, but I will tell you, when I was working on drafting this section of the guidance, I didn't realize how, well, I knew it was always complicated, but trying to explain it and to really put all the pieces together gave me a new appreciation for how complex the concept of change in placement really can be. If the first criteria is met, that's fairly straightforward. And a change of placement occurs if a child is proposed for removal for more than 10 consecutive school days. Pretty straightforward. People can count that. That's fairly easy to determine and say, yes, what they're doing here is going to result in a change of placement. The second way you can meet change in placement is much more complex. And that's if a child has been subjected to a series of removals that constitute a pattern. So, what makes something a pattern? Well, the regulations set forth these criteria, and I apologize, the slide should say, so if you're taking notes on this, it should say it's a series of removals that total more than 10 school days in a school year, and the child's behavior is substantially similar to the child's behavior in previous incidents that resulted in the series of removals, and There's consideration of additional factors, such as the length of the removal, the total amount of time the child was removed, how close together the removals occurred. Those are all three ingredients to making up what is a pattern that will equal a change in placement. And who gets to make that decision? School personnel make that decision. It's not necessarily an IEP team. I guess a school could pull together an IEP team if they wanted to, but the regulations give the authority to make this decision to school personnel. And one of the things that is not in the regulations that I want to emphasize to you in your roles as having direct contact with parents, if the school decides there's no pattern, there is no requirement to notify parents of that decision. There is a requirement to notify parents when a decision is made that there will be a change of placement, but there is no requirement in the regulations that schools must inform parents when that school official says, I've looked at all this information, no pattern here, no change of placement. Why is change in placement decision so important? It's what triggers some of the other protections of IDEA. It's how you get to that manifestation determination meeting, right? There's no requirement to have a manifestation determination meeting unless the child's removal constitutes a change in placement. I know I'm probably grinding this into the ground too much, but I feel like I can't emphasize enough. It's really important that you guys feel well grounded in understanding the criteria for what is a change in placement and helping parents be able to point to this information. And we have a whole section C, of the Q&A document that is devoted to this. Kim and Keisha did a national TA call last month in which they encouraged SEAs and local educational agencies to consider whether, any additional technical assistance or support was needed for them to understand and implement these requirements, particularly as it relates to the requirement regarding removals and whether it's a pattern. Additionally, during that call last month, they encourage state level or district level leaders to consider, how schools are actually implementing this requirement. How are they keeping track of removals and their decision-making process and whether the removals constitute a pattern? So the last bullet on this slide addresses the information in our guidance that says, you know what? If there are informal removals to the extent that they constitute, what we say needs to be counted as a disciplinary removal, those also need to be considered when you're deciding whether a change in placement has occurred. So in your role, just want to reinforce, you might hear from parents who describe, their child has been sent home or had a number of removals that might seem to constitute a pattern. You can reinforce with those parents the importance of documenting on their end what kinds of experiences they are having with their child being sent home informally or being, removed informally in other ways at school. And while the duty really is on the school to do this, we know that documentation is our friend, that if parents have concerns, being able to kind of whip out that documentation with the dates and the facts that occurred will be really helpful to them should they have concerns going forward. I feel like I'm probably talking too much
Lisa?
Yeah.
Lisa, there's a question in that you might be able to answer right now because it's directly related to the 10
Okay.
days. Somebody said that
Yeah.
Cindy asked whether or not the pattern must also equal 10 days, even if they're not together. Is that correct?
Right. Well, let's look at the ingredients. We're making a change of emplacement cake here. So we have to have a series of removals that total more than 10 school days in a school year. So it might be 2 plus 4 plus 3. I'm not good at math at whatever point. When we get to the point that it's more than 10, that's when we say, okay, we've hit more than 10. Then remember, they don't have to be consecutive. So now let's look at the other factors. So it was aggressive behavior with one removal. It was defiant, but I don't know. I'm not the behavior person. But let's say that the student was put out for behavior. It might not have been the exact same type of behavior, but the underlying function or the description of the behavior would be substantially similar. Then you could look at how long were they out, how close were those removals to each other. If it was one removal at the beginning of the school year and one removal at the end of the school year, people might say that doesn't really constitute a pattern. But what we hear through our customer service are situations of kids being sent home or suspended, a day here, 2 days here, 3 days here, another day here, fairly close together, which would never come up to be the consecutive school days. But when looking at the totality of those removals, it would be reasonable to say, you know what, this is a pattern. We need to go and forward and have a manifestation determination meeting, look at whether we need to do an FBA if one's never been done, we need to do one. If it's a manifestation of the child's disability, all of those protections that IDEA includes. But remember, we never get to those protections unless there's been a change in placement. Did I answer the question?
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on. Next slide, please. And just so you know, I don't really cook. So when I talk about making cakes and using recipes, it's kind of funny. Okay, so again, we're going to move on and keep talking a little bit more about informal removals. That is a theme throughout the guidance. Next slide, please. And one that we have heard from stakeholders like you saying it is so critically important that we address this issue head on. So again, no definition in IDEA. We provide one in the guidance. I'm not going to read it here, but just want to make sure that you have this information. Again, when these kinds of procedures are used repeatedly, it can result in a denial of FAPE. Remember the 3-part recipe for informal removal I mentioned earlier, though. If the child, someone gave me an example the other day, it might have even been Kim, I can't remember, when we were talking, maybe a child is sent from one classroom to another classroom, but they're still able to do the same work. They're still with their non-disabled peers. They're still participating in the general ed curriculum. That would not meet the definition of informal removal that would be counted toward a disciplinary removal, because all 3 pieces of that informal removal recipe have been met. The child's IEP services are still being provided, they're still progressing, participating in the general ed environment, and they're still able to participate with their non-disabled peers to the same extent. Normally, we, as I said earlier, we expect this bar to be pretty high. And the kinds of informal removals that we are most concerned about would never meet that bar of all 3 ingredients. I think some of the most common ones we're talking about: administratively shortened school days. That's when maybe the principal, the assistant principal, decides, what, we're only going to have this child come to school a half day. This is not the same as when an IEP team comes together and says, to address the student's needs, not to address maybe the school's tolerance needs, or the school personnel's preference. Shortened school days, if it's a decision made by the IEP team that is appropriate and necessary for FAPE for that child, then that's not what we're talking about here. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay. So again, I think I've already gone over those three factors that are so important to keep in mind as to whether an informal removal counts toward the time that could create a change in placement. I think I've already covered the second bullet that talks about, these kinds of practices can result in a denial of FAPE. And, that's one of the real key phrases, I suppose, when you're working with parents and they're concerned about these kinds of disciplinary removals. I think it's an important question. Is this impacting the child's receipt of FAPE? What needs to happen for that child to continue to receive FAPE? Do they need to have the IEP team reconvene, look at appropriate, behavioral supports and strategies? What kinds of things can be put in place so that that child can have more success and be able to learn in the educational environment that their IEP or placement team determined was appropriate for them, where their IEP should be implemented. Let's go to the next slide, please. Oh, all right. So one of the things that became clear to me as we were working on this guidance package is hearing from our experts in the office about behavior really being a form of communication. And so the picture that Kim has shared with us in the PowerPoint here, we can understand a bit what this child is trying to tell us by having her back turned and her facial expression. We know that many children, including children with disabilities, often rely on verbal or nonverbal behaviors to really communicate their wants, their needs, their feelings. And these behaviors can be appropriate for the setting, such as raising a hand to answer a question. Sometimes we know the kinds of things that parents get caught about when a child is refusing to do their work, or more problematic behaviors for the learning of others, the yelling or flipping a desk or really disrupting the classroom. And often this leads to a reactionary response. A teacher may send the child to the principal's office, remove the child from class. It can even result in suspension from school. And we know this isn't new information for you, but just wanted you to know that this was part of our thinking and what helped to create the guidance package in terms of being aware and knowing that addressing and supporting a child's behavioral needs is really key. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So I've thrown around the term manifestation determination review earlier. Again, this is where we land when a child has been proposed for removal that will result in a change in placement, whether it's that more than 10 consecutive school days or doing, cooking up the change in placement cake due to having a pattern of removals. The Q&A answers each of the questions that you will that are displayed in the slide. We've heard that the process for manifestation determination reviews, the quality of discussions, the data that are being looked at and considered really vary greatly. In the call that Kim and Keisha did last month, they encourage states and LEAs to explore, again, is more training or technical assistance needed to ensure that IEP teams are meaningfully, conducting meaningful considerations of all the information that they have available to the child to make a well-reasoned decision about whether the behavior that resulted in the child's removal is or is not a manifestation of their disabilities. So there's tons of information that we could share about manifestation determination reviews, but we only have an hour with you today. So we're going to go on to the next slide. Just encourage you to read to read carefully section F of the document that goes into more detail about manifestation determination reviews. So you can see that on this slide that a team must conclude that the behavior was a manifestation of the child's disability if one of these two criteria are met. If the behavior was caused by or had a direct and substantial relationship to the child's disability, or if the behavior was the direct result of the LEA's failure to implement the IEP. And I will tell you, we've received a lot of questions about how related to what part of the IEP can't be implemented and it not result in the behavior being a manifestation of the child's disability. I did not say that well. Let me try again. So is it any part of the IEP that wasn't implemented? Does that mean that it's automatically going to be a manifestation of the child's disability? So I'm sure you will get all those kinds of questions real quickly. Let's go to the next slide. I think that we've got a lot of information here that will just be for review for you. I know that we're running short on time. Let's talk real quickly about, let's proceed to the next slide. Is that actions IEP teams must take? Yes. Okay. So real quickly, just to review, if the behavior is a manifestation of the child's disability, then the LEA must conduct an FBA unless already one had been done, and implement a behavioral intervention plan, or if there's already a behavioral intervention plan, review it and revise it as needed. Put the child back in the placement from where they were removed, unless sometimes the LEA and parent agree, you know what, that's not really the right place. Let's change the placement. If there's a problem with the IEP, the LEA must fix that problem. For the special circumstances, if a child was removed for weapons, drugs, or serious bodily injury, that's when we know that the child may remain in an interim alternative education setting, but not for more than 45 school days. So this slide talks about when they must do an FBA. We at the department have really been encouraging LEAs and states to think about using FBAs more broadly, not just in the discipline context. And so that might be something you guys are already talking with parents about. If not, it might be something you want to consider. I think I've got more slides, but I think we probably can move beyond those. Can I see the next slide, please? Because I really want to give Kim and Keisha a chance. You can just read this on your own if it's not a manifestation, what the school officials can do. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in making a manifestation determination, like any other IEP team decision, parents and school staff may not agree. We know that the LEA ultimately makes the call and needs to provide the parent with prior written notice. The parent has the right to exercise their procedural safeguards, including requesting mediation. They can file a due process complaint, which must be done in the expedited timelines IDEA requires. And they can also choose to file a state complaint to resolve the disagreement about whether the behavior was a manifestation. And I think that is my do I have more slides? I think I might. Kim is really heavy on the slide. She's good. She likes a good presentation. Let's keep moving on. I don't think it's Kim's turn still. Services during removals, just want to highlight. There are, if a child is removed for a total of 10 school days or less in a school year, the LEA isn't obligated to provide services to a child with a disability unless they also provide services to children without disabilities. We have always been bothered when we heard LEAs or sometimes even attorneys and others talk about the FAPE-free zone or the 10 free days and that kind of thing. In this guidance, while we can't, require LEAs to provide services because the statute and regulations don't provide for that, we certainly encouraged in the guidance that LEAs provide services even during such short-term removals, even though they're not required. It's really hard for children with disabilities to be able to progress in the general curriculum, and if they're going to be out and not provided services. Move on to the next slide, please. All right, so this slide speaks to when a child has been removed for more than 10 school days in a school year. So cumulatively more than 10, whether it's a manifestation, not a manifestation. If you're out more than 10 school days for disciplinary removals beginning on the 11th cumulative day and any other days the child is removed, the LEA is on the hook for providing services as determined by school staff. So we have said, sometimes if it's a very brief removal, there may not be a requirement to provide us services. But if the removal, regardless of the length, constitutes a change of placement, that's when the IEP team decides what are appropriate services to enable the child, to be able to participate in the general ed curriculum, work toward, progressing on the goals in their IEP. And again, as we talked about before, there may be a need to do an FBA, provide behavioral intervention services, and other supports so that the behavior does not, recur. Next slide, please. And I think this is Kim finally. Is this you, Kim?
It is, but thank you, Lisa. That was awesome. Really appreciate you going over everything. I know it's a lot. We wanted you just to have the information, even if we weren't able to go into great detail in each slide. We wanted to make sure that it was available for you to review at a later time. So thank you, Lisa. That was a haul. So thank you for that. And thank you for all the questions coming in the chat. Really appreciate that feedback as well. I want to switch gears a little bit and discuss how IDEA and our guidance really seeks to really highlight this point that behavior is a form of communication and that we have to be looking at this through a proactive and preventative approach. And so can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So one of the ways in which we are reiterating this in the guidance, so I'm not going to read through this slide for you, but essentially what this slide says is that addressing behavior for a child with a disability where their behavior impedes their learning or that of others is a necessary and vital role of the IEP team. It is required and it must occur. And so OSEP is concerned that IEPs are not addressing behavioral needs. We are concerned that behavioral supports are not being implemented within the child's school. And as a result, we are seeing disciplinary referrals and removals. Next slide, please. So to further reiterate this point, the Q&A reminds IEP teams that they must be looking at behavior, right? That means sometimes they're going to have to revise a child's IEP. Sometimes they're going to have to get additional assessments if more data is needed. Just generally, the Q&A really seeks to reinforce this idea that we must be doing a better job in looking at addressing the behavioral needs of kids with disabilities in their IEP and within the IEP team. And so we know that you know this, but we wanted to pull it out for you in case it is helpful in your own work with the parent community and then also in working with schools. Next slide, please. So as Lisa mentioned, we are really focusing on FBAs and looking at how right now FBAs, as you know, are very much tied to the discipline context. They are only required in the discipline context, right? But we are looking at how we can expand their use. And so to that end, the Q&A includes a description of an FBA, which you see on the screen. The technical assistance document lays out a description of an FBA process. And the Q&A also includes an entire section, section G, that highlights FBAs and behavioral intervention plans. And so we really want to be able to reinforce that when we look at the origin of a child's behavior, when we think about behavior as a form of communication, we really have to be looking at understanding the function or purpose of that behavior. And we feel that engaging in an FBA process is an effective way, an effective tool for educators and families to work together in this way. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you know, this is what I just referred to on the last slide. IDA only requires an FBA to be conducted specifically after a manifestation determination review has concluded that the child's behavior that resulted in the disciplinary change of placement was indeed a manifestation of that child's disability. But the Q&A and the TA document, as Lisa said too, make very clear that OSEP believes that FBAs may be conducted in other circumstances as well. Next slide, please. And actually, I'm going to skip 2 slides if that's okay. Great, perfect. So keeping with this theme that we want to be proactive in addressing the needs of children with disabilities, we really have to do so by looking at what our data is telling us, right? We know that the racial disparities that exist for children with disabilities in the discipline context is longstanding, and it continues today. And so in the Q&A, we have an entire section that focuses on the role of LEA and SEA oversight and reporting responsibilities. I won't go into great detail here just because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but section L is the section of the Q&A that really digs deeply into this, and I will just kind of briefly go over it at a high level on the next slide, please. So in general, and thank you. So in general, the Q&A highlights 3 ways in which states are required to review their discipline data through their general supervision requirements, through an examination of whether there are significant discrepancies in long-term suspensions and expulsions, including by race and ethnicity, and by examining whether there is significant disproportionality by race and ethnicity in the discipline of children with disabilities. So maybe through our conversation today, and if not today, maybe in a future time, we can discuss how, if at all, the PTIs are involved in this conversation with states, not only a look at the state data, but also looking at policies, practices, and procedures for how to make some substantial changes in this area. Okay, next slide, please. So we only have a few minutes today to talk about the technical assistance document, but we really are, we issued the technical assistance document as a companion piece to the Q&A because we felt that it was important to give stakeholders actionable, practical, evidence-based resources that, while they are not required by law, certainly can support reducing exclusionary discipline. And we know that if we want that reduction in exclusionary discipline to occur, we have to give stakeholders the tools to do so. And so that's what our technical assistance document seeks to do. Next slide, please. So the TA document really highlights 4 key areas. Really, it looks at evidence-based approaches to support and respond to student needs. Those are approaches such as positive behavioral interventions and supports, universal design for learning, multi-tiered systems of support, functional behavioral assessments, that kind of thing. And then the TA document talks about investing in educator and school capacity. And the last 2 really focus on providing stakeholders at the state and the local levels with connection to federal resources that are available, both through funding and also through technical assistance. Next slide, please. So we didn't want to let you go today without letting you know that we have, in September, we launched a website on the OSEP ideasthatwork.org website. we launched a web page on this website that will serve as a hub for implementation related resources that kind of accompany the guidance package. And we focus on the 6 key areas that you see here. And I won't go into them in great detail, but I did want to show you an example of a resource guide. If you don't mind going to the next slide, that would be great. So we have 8 resource guides that we have published on this web page. And essentially what these resource guides seek to do is that they really are a curated set of resources that are aligned to the overall topics of the guide. So this one is an example. I know you can't see it, but this is an example. It's a guide on how to reduce exclusionary discipline practices. And it's a curated set of resources from our technical assistance centers that provide information on a variety of topics that are related to reducing exclusionary discipline. So we have these on 8 different topics that you can review on that OSEP Ideas That Work webpage. And we hope that this will be helpful in your communication with families and educators because we really want to provide not just a set of rules and regulations of what is required, although of course that is critical, but we also want to provide some actionable items of what how stakeholders can seek to implement positive change. And then the next slide, please. And lastly, we wanted to share with you a couple of links. If you would like more videos on presentations that we've done on the discipline guidance, we have 2 additional videos that you can review. And we have them linked here in the PowerPoint as well. So if we can skip 2 slides, that would be great. We have our TA centers, which you can visit. So really, Lisa, Keisha, and I, on behalf of all of OSEP staff, really just want to thank you for taking the time today to join us. But really, more importantly, thank you for the work that you're doing every single day. Like David said earlier, navigating rules and requirements related to IDEA can be intimidating and difficult for families, and it's so important for them to know that they have a trusted resource. So thank you for being that trusted resource. I know we only have a few minutes to address questions, but I'll toss it back to, let's see, Carmen maybe, to see if we want to, how we might want to address a couple of questions, if we have time for a question or 2.
Sure, there's a couple questions you might be able to answer. There's a total of 29 open questions still in the Quest Q&A. We will do our best to respond to these afterwards if we cannot get to them all right now. But one of the questions is from Dawn McGrath, and she says, is it correct to understand that any student with an IEP is entitled to behavioral considerations and support regardless of the disability? We get pushback from schools on this. They seem to be determining the manifestation question while writing the IEP and determining, since the behavior is not connected to the elements required for eligibility, the student is not entitled to behavioral support once they are found eligible. You're talking and you're muted.
I'm on mute, yes, I realized. And I'll invite Lisa and Keisha also to join me. I'm happy to take a first stab at this question. I probably could use reading it, frankly, but I will say, you know, IDEA is pretty clear that anytime the behavior of a child with a disability impedes their learning or that of others, it is incumbent on the IEP team to address that child's behavior through the IEP. And so, you know, regardless of the disability, I think that was the first part of the question, and so regardless of the disability, if the behavior itself is acting as an impediment to that child's learning or that of others, then it has to be addressed. Should have written down the rest of the question. Oh, the MDR being conducted before eligibility. I guess there are 2 ways I would kind of answer this, and Lisa, maybe you want to chime in. Well, maybe you, I know we're short on time, so if you want to go first.
I'm trying to get, can you guys hear me?
A little bit.
I've mucked up so bad I can't get back to the screen. I don't know where it is, but we have a question about this, how you make a manifestation determination decision when a child hasn't even been identified yet as having a disability. So we have a specific question about that and the kinds of information that teams should consider in that kind of situation. But just want to reiterate what Kim said. It doesn't matter what the unidentified disability is. If the child has behaviors that interfere with their learning or interfere with the learning of others, that IEP team must, under 300.324, I think it is, something or the other, that's one of the special considerations that they must go through and address in the child's IEP.
And Lisa, I think it's section I in our Q&A that is titled Protections for Children Not Yet Determined Eligible for Services under IDEA. So if that, I think if that's where
Perfect.
you're going with this question, you know, there are requirements regarding how the LEA is deemed to have knowledge that the child may be a child with a disability. And so we would really encourage you to read that section I.
Yep. Question I-8 in particular deals with making those manifestation determinations when a child has not yet been determined eligible.
Thank you. There's also a lot of comments here in the question and answers about what some other parent centers are doing. And there's a lot of questions about what it's like actually boots on the ground in terms of what's actually happening in schools. And we can't really address any kind of child specific questions here. But I have posted how you can get in contact with your state contact and monitoring and state division if you have some particular questions also.
Yeah, Carmen, just real quick, a bottom line, as I said earlier, if the actions of a school are denying a child FAPE, then all roads lead to parents have the right to use the dispute resolution procedures. I know, you know, not everybody, you know, finds those procedures to be always fair or get the result that they want, but those procedures are available whenever an action of the school results in a denial of FAPE, and it has to do with some aspect of IDEA.
Oh, I see that there was a question about whether manifestation determinations reviews, whether they should also consider the failure of the LEA to implement the IEP. And yes, we do address that in the MDR section F. Of course, you know, it's the two, of course, we think of, well, we know manifestation determinations are based on either one of two factors, right? Whether the manifestation was, whether the behavior was a manifestation of that child's disability, or the second factor, whether the behavior was a result of the LEA's failure to implement the IEP. So thank you for raising that. It is in the Q&A and also in the slides as well. Just trying to go through some of the questions as well.
There's also a question here about why 10 days versus 5 days. And of course, that has to do with what's currently in IDEA. And as everyone knows, when IDEA gets reauthorized, there's always opportunity for citizen comment in terms of the content of the law. So,
right.
Okay. I thank you, everyone, for participating in this. We're going to keep these open questions open, and like I said, we'll figure out a way of getting some of these questions answered, probably along with the recording of this webinar, and the PowerPoint will be with the recording on the SIPR website. So be on the lookout for when SIPR announces that this will be ready. And again, I want to thank our participants, David Cantrell, Kim Himes, Lisa Pagano, and Keisha Blythe for participating on this with us. Thank you very much for all your work.
Our apologies to the translators. We were just going too fast. Hey guys, thanks for letting us be with you today.